In the last episode of this series, I showed you how our little group of cruisers took the high-speed train from Hamburg, Germany down to Cologne to board the Nicko Rhine River Cruise ship. Check-in did take a little while, but nowhere near as long as check-in for the Symphony of the Seas, for example. Within the first 48 hours on board, we sailed away, took a gondola 370 feet above the river in the city of Koblenz to visit a fortress, and floated past one amazing fairy tale castle after another in the Rhine River Gorge. After a great first dinner, we made it an early night and woke up the next morning in the city of Ludwigshafen, which is right across the river from the more popular city of Mannheim. I wanted to show you here that there's no blackout curtains in the cabin on the Rhine Symphony, so when it was bright outside, it was also bright inside, which made getting up early pretty easy. This was also the day that the Amma Prima was docked next to us, which allowed me to get a closer look at this luxury class river cruiser and ask the question, what on earth are they charging so much money for? I talked about that in another video, so check out my library if you want to see that in more detail. One thing that has been consistent on all 3 river cruises I've done is that breakfast is a buffet with hot and cold options, and at breakfast, you get the lunch and dinner menu and have to order your lunch and dinner before you leave the table for breakfast. One thing that Nicko does that I haven't experienced on the other lines was offer a small casual buffet in the lounge for anyone who doesn't feel like ordering their lunch at breakfast or gets back to the ship a little bit too late. Overall, we were really pleased with the food on board, and of course, on other lines, the food may be a little more Instagrammable, with fancy, crunchy Parmesan chips and dots of pesto along the edge of the plate or things like that, but taste is also important, and for the low price of this cruise, this was all better than just okay. We were only in Mannheim for half a day, and honestly, we were feeling a little bit lazy, so we took the train into the city center, and I showed the group the famous Mannheimer water tower that I also visited on my last river cruise with the Miss Viva Tierra. The water tower and the beautiful gardens and fountains surrounding it were a project that was started back in 1739. The fountains were built first, but the architect in charge of the quite large project realized he had promised something he couldn't deliver, and he peaced out before they were finished. After that, the project sat half-finished and dry for 60 years before they finally found someone with enough expertise to jump on the project and get it finished. The water tower was built in the late 1800s and was actually still in operation until the year 2000. I think that's fascinating. I feel like in other countries, something like this that then no longer is serving its original purpose would be torn down to make room for condos, a Walmart, and probably a Starbucks. But this is still here, and it's beautiful, and it's free to visit. We made it back on board for dinner, and another thing I wanted to mention is that in the main dining room, the staff made a really big deal out of anyone who had a birthday, and it seemed like at every meal, somebody was getting a cake with a sparkler in it, and everything stopped so the whole dining room could sing happy birthday to them. I threatened Marcus every day that I was going to tell him that it was his birthday if he wasn't nice to me, and it worked. So make sure you subscribe for more healthy relationship advice. By this time, we were actually cruising back up the river to the city of Mainz, which we had already passed on the way to Mannheim. I mentioned that the stretch of the Rhine between Koblenz and Mainz is spectacular, and it is, but just so you know, the stretch from Mainz to Mannheim is pretty average, with a lot more industry and modern-looking towns than fairy tale castles, ruins, and vineyards. That night in the lounge, there was a crew talent show that was, yeah, it was good for a laugh and at least something to do, but of course nowhere even close to the level of entertainment on the big ocean cruise lines. I haven't seen any big shows being offered on any of the river cruises I've done so far, and river cruising, it's not about what happens on the ship. It's about the places that you go. By the way, our cruise was not all in, but we booked the drink package, and I wanted to show you some of the individual prices for drinks on board. Pretty reasonable, I think, and definitely less expensive than many other ships I've been on. After dinner, back in the cabin, we got the information for what's happening the next day and ended up going back up to the bar to hang out with some of our table mates until much too late in the morning. After we finally dragged ourselves out of bed for breakfast the next day, we only had about an hour and a half in the city of Mainz, which we used to quickly run through some of the city's beautiful cathedrals. If you watched my series about cruising with Miss Viva Tiara, you'll remember that Mainz is the city where the printing press was invented. There's a whole museum dedicated to Gutenberg and his journey, but we just didn't have time this time. The final stop on this cruise was the quaint city of Rüdesheim. This traditional-looking German town was kind of an unexpected highlight for me. We were docked a little bit outside of the city, but there were taxis right up the street, and it was only about a 20-minute walk to the Drosselgasse, which is a street you're definitely going to want to visit if you visit this city.
I believe one day, I believe in the future. I believe in the past. I believe what you truly desire, you can bring the past. All you need is a focus.
The Drosselgasse is a famous narrow passageway filled with shops, restaurants, and bars, and is a perfect place to get something to take home that proves you were in Germany. Some of it is respectable and handcrafted, and some of it is just kind of funny and trashy, but that's how these streets always are. If you do come here, make sure you have at least one glass of the locally produced wine or one of the famous flaming coffees that they offer. Funny story, we sat down at a nice looking wine bar and I picked out 2 different wines I wanted to try. After ordering, the waiter said, you know we're famous for the white wine we produce, right? I said yes. He said, well, you ordered 2 red wines, so maybe you want to try a white wine too? Oops, I just misread the menu. I wanted to order white wines, but not sure how that happened. Just about a block from the highest end of the Drosselgasse is the entrance to the gondola, which will take you up to the monument and lookout way up the hill. A round trip costs 10 euros for adults and will allow you to fly up over the grapes to the top. And if you're into walking, if you walk just a little bit more upwards past the entrance to the gondola, not only will you see many more really traditional looking photogenic German buildings.
They do such a good job of making it look just like Germany here. It's amazing.
But there's also a walking path all the way up the hill too.
I'm definitely not going to be walking all the way up there, but I got about a glass and a half of fantastic German white wine in me. And I thought I'd take a look at how far I could walk until there's some kind of payoff. Okay, I think I'll walk until where the path goes under the gondola, and I think that'll be enough for me today. And I'm actually surprised that I'm not the only person on this pathway. There's a few other crazy people in this world as well.
I didn't make it all the way to the top because there just wasn't enough time. But it was cool to be standing in the middle of this huge vineyard that has produced wine for around the world for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. If you do go to the top by walking or the gondola, not only can you look for this hidden Mickey, but there's a huge monument commemorating the first unification of Germany back in the late 1800s. This isn't the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, East Berlin, West Berlin unification, but the one where all the kingdoms of Germany decided to unify into one country with several states. Oh my gosh, so many facts in these last few episodes. What's happening? Pretty soon I'm gonna have to drop the out of unofficial. I made it back on board literally just a few minutes before sail away, and that was the afternoon where I filmed the cabin tour, which is already online if you want to see it. We packed our bags and enjoyed a little bit of sightseeing from the top deck before the final dinner. I've mentioned this several times in all my other river cruising videos. One major attraction, at least for me, is just sitting on the top deck and watching the world go by. The towns, the bridges, and on the stretch of Rhine between Koblenz and Mainz, all the amazing castles. Not every stretch of every river cruise is spectacular and offers something beautiful, but this one sure had a lot.
Someday we only try it. Either way, we're gonna get someday. I'll make it on time. Someday, other days we only can try. Other days, no matter what they say, we gonna get. Someday we'll make it on time. Someday, other days we only can try. Other days, no matter what people say. Either way, we're gonna get there. Someday we'll make it on time. Other days we only can try.
And speaking of something beautiful, when we arrived in Cologne the next morning and had to disembark the ship, we used the 3 hours before our train left to visit the world-famous cathedral, which is absolutely gigantic and so impressive and located conveniently next to the main station. Overall, I am so happy I had this opportunity with Marcus, my mom, and Tim. Nicko gave us a great cruise and the price was just right. This was a fantastic way to spend 5 days in Germany, and it was great to once again be reminded that a fantastic river cruise does not have to cost you several thousands of dollars. Let me know what you enjoyed about this series, and speaking of family, I'm on my way to Minnesota right now, so I might be a little bit off the radar for a few weeks, but don't worry, I'll be back soon. See you then.